Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into really one of the most pivotal and unique battles of the Second World War. We're talking about the Battle of Crete in May 1941.
That's right. Operation Mercury, as the Germans called it.
And what makes it so unique, really, is that it was the first major invasion launched primarily from the air. Paratroopers, gliders.
Yeah.
It was completely new territory.
So our mission today, using the historical records, the analyses, the testimonies, it's to give you a shortcut, really, to understanding the strategy, the sheer human drama, and frankly, the brutal cost of this 13-day fight.
And for you listening, we want to dig into some fundamental questions that Crete throws up.
Exactly. Like, how could the Allies have this incredible intelligence advantage, ultra decrypts, and still lose? What did this battle reveal about the German military machine, its strengths, but also its surprising weaknesses?
And the human element.
Oh, absolutely. What happens when this, highly trained, elite airborne force comes crashing down onto an island where not just soldiers, but ordinary civilians, men, women, even priests, pick up whatever they can find and fight back with absolute fury? It's an incredible story.
Before we get into the invasion itself, we need to understand why Crete mattered so much. This wasn't just some random island.
No, strategically, it was vital. Think about its location in the Eastern Mediterranean. For the British, holding Crete meant Royal Navy ships had crucial harbors.
And maybe even more importantly,
Airfields. Airfields that put British bombers within striking distance of the Romanian Ploiești oil fields.
which were essentially the fuel tank for Hitler's entire war machine, particularly for the upcoming invasion of Russia.
Precisely. So for Hitler, neutralizing Crete meant securing his southern flank, protecting that oil supply. For the Allies, it wasn't just losing territory, it was a major strategic blow.
Okay, so the stakes are incredibly high. Let's set the scene just before Operation Mercury kicks off.
Right, you have to go back just a little bit to October 1940. Italy invades Greece, and the British respond by garrisoning Crete. It made perfect sense, help protect their shipping lanes.
A standard strategic move at the time.
Yeah, fairly routine. But then comes April 41, and everything changes. The Germans launch Operation Mercury, their blitzkrieg through mainland Greece.
And the Allied forces there are basically routed.
Completely. The Royal Navy has to stage this massive, desperate evacuation. They pull out about 57,000 Allied troops, British, Australian, New Zealanders.
And where do most of them end up?
Dumped onto Crete, shaken, exhausted, disorganized, and critically, without most of their heavy equipment. Tanks, artillery, even basic transport, most of it was left behind on the mainland.
So the garrison on Crete suddenly swells, but with troops who are in pretty bad shape.
Exactly. Yet the pressure from London was immense. Churchill was adamant. He famously said, to lose Crete because we had not sufficient bulk of forces, there would be a crime. They had to hold it.
Understood. So that's the Allied situation. What about the Germans? Were they all gung-ho for this airborne assault?
Not at all, actually. This is fascinating. The German Army High Command, the OKH, they were largely against it.
Really? Why?
They saw it as a sideshow, a dangerous diversion of precious resources, especially elite troops, and, crucially, transport aircraft.
Because their eyes were already fixed eastward.
Completely. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, was just weeks away. That was the main event. Everything was supposed to be geared towards that.
So who was pushing for the Crete operation?
Well, Hitler himself was concerned, as we said, about protecting those Romanian oil fields. But the real driving force was the Luftwaffe.
Ah, the Air Force.
Yes, remember, they'd taken a beating in the Battle of Britain. Their prestige was damaged. Luftwaffe commanders, especially General Kurt Student, the pioneer of German airborne forces, saw Crete as a chance to prove what they could do. A spectacular, daring, airborne-only capture to restore their reputation.
And this idea, this airborne gamble, appealed to Hitler.
It did. Because, look, the Royal Navy absolutely dominated the sea around Crete. A traditional seaborne invasion was just unthinkable. Too risky.
Suicide, basically.
Pretty much. So the airborne option, while incredibly risky and unprecedented on this scale, seemed like the only viable way. They decided to go all in.
The largest airborne invasion in history up to that point. What did that actually involve in terms of numbers and the plan?
The plan itself, Operation Mercury, was based on existing German airborne doctrine, just scaled up massively. The core idea was simple, in theory.
Simple but risky.
Very. You parachute in the elite Fallschirmjäger, the paratroopers first. Small units, hitting key points simultaneously. Their job. Seize vital ground, especially the airfields, and neutralize the immediate defenses.
And then
Then, once an airfield is secured, you use transport planes, the Junkers Ju-52s, and gliders to pour in the main force. In this case, it was the 5th Mountain Division, plus heavy weapons, supplies, everything needed to consolidate the whole.
Speed was everything.
Absolutely critical. The whole thing relied on shock, speed, and overwhelming the defenders before they could properly react.
So the numbers committed.
It's pretty staggering for an airborne operation in 41. You're looking at about 750 troops landing by glider, 10,000 paratroopers jumping in, another 5,000 mountain troops to be flown in once the airfields were taken, plus a supporting sea convoy planned with around 7,000 more troops.
And they didn't need to capture the whole island at once.
No, the key was the airfields. Maleme, in the west, was the absolute primary target.
Why Maleme specifically?
Several reasons. It was the largest airfield best suited for those big Ju-52 transports. It was also closest to mainland Greece, meaning German fighter planes. The Messerschmitt Bf-109s could provide continuous air cover over the landing zones. That air superiority was crucial.
Got it. So the force was divided.
Yes, into 3 main battle groups. Group West targeted Maleme. Group Center aimed for the administrative capital, Chainia, and the airfield at Rethymno. And Group East went for the airfield at Heraklion. The thinking was, if they could secure just one of those airfields quickly, they could win.
Okay, let's shift to the defenders, Cree Force, commanded by Major General Bernard Freiberg, a Victoria Cross recipient. What was he actually working with?
On paper, about 42,500 men. Sounds decent, right?
It does.
But the reality was grim. As we mentioned, a large chunk were those demoralized evacuees from Greece, poorly equipped, shaken. Then you had the Greek contingent, maybe 10,000 strong, incredibly brave, but their equipment.
You mentioned outdated rifles.
Seriously outdated. Some units had the Fusil grass rifle, a single-shot weapon from the 1870s. Ammunition was critically low. Reports suggest many soldiers had fewer than 30 rounds each. It's heartbreaking.
And armor, heavy weapons.
Virtually non-existent. They had, I think, 9 Matilda tanks left over from Greece, plus 16 very light tanks. The Matildas were apparently so worn out they were mostly used as static pillboxes, not for counterattack.
So almost no mobile punch.
Very little. And anti-aircraft defenses were just pitifully thin. Across the whole island, maybe 8 heavy AA guns and 20 lighter Bofors guns. And remember, the RAF had already pulled its fighter planes out.
Why did you do that?
They knew they couldn't survive the initial German air onslaught. They were completely outnumbered. So Freiberg was left facing the Luftwaffe, basically, with rifles and a handful of AA guns.
That context is crucial when we talk about intelligence, because the Germans seem to have completely misread the situation.
A massive intelligence failure on their part. Admiral Canaris, head of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, reported only 5,000 British troops on the island.
5,000, against the reality of over 40,000 Allied personnel.
Exactly, a staggering miscalculation. And he also believed the Cretan civilians, supposedly having anti-royalist feelings, would actually welcome the Germans.
Wow. Talk about getting it wrong.
Completely wrong. It meant the Germans went in significantly underestimating the resistance they'd face, both military and civilian. This directly contributed to their horrific losses on day one.
Which stands in such stark contrast to the Allied intelligence picture, thanks to Ultra.
Ultra, the breaking of the German Enigma code. This is where the story gets really complex and, frankly, tragic. Bletchley Park was reading German signals traffic in almost real time.
So they knew the invasion was coming.
Oh, they knew much more than that. By early May, they were tracking the assembly of the German airborne forces, Fliegerkorps XI, counting the Ju-52 transport planes gathering in Greece. By May 5th, decrypts explicitly stated Crete was the target.
Okay, so they knew the what and the where.
And then on May 6th, they got the crown jewels, decrypted orders detailing the exact landing zones, Maleme, Chania, Heraklion, Rethymno, and even the timings.
They knew the entire plan, landing zones, timings, almost 2 weeks in advance. That should have been checkmate, surely.
It should have been. This is the great paradox of Crete. Perfect intelligence, but it didn't lead to victory. Why?
Freiberg, armed with this incredible ultra-intelligence, he must have known the German playbook was to seize the airfields.
He absolutely did. He'd studied previous, smaller German airborne operations. He knew their priority was the airfields. His logical military conclusion, make the airfields unusable, crater them, plow them up, obstruct them with wreckage. Anything to stop those Ju-52s from landing reinforcement.
That makes perfect sense. So why didn't he?
He requested permission, but he was overruled by Middle East Command in Cairo.
Overruled? Why on earth would they do that?
It seems to be a combination of factors. Over-optimism, perhaps. A desire to keep the airfields intact so the RAF could fly back in quickly after the initial airborne assault was beaten off.
So they were already planning for the counterattack, assuming the defense would hold.
It appears so. A kind of strategic hubris, maybe. They failed to imagine the possibility that the initial defense wouldn't hold, especially without usable airfields. They prioritized a potential future offensive capability over ensuring the immediate defense. A catastrophic decision made hundreds of miles away.
Wow. So perfect intel on the German plan, but a command decision prevents the most logical countermeasure.
And it gets even more complicated when you look at how Freiberg deployed his troops, even with the Ultra information.
What happened there?
The Ultra messages mention both the airborne assault and the possibility of follow-up seaborne landings to bring in heavy gear, tanks, artillery.
Right, the 7,000 troops planned for the sea convoy.
Exactly. Now, Freiberg, critically short of anti-tank guns and heavy weapons, looked at his resources. He seems to have feared a concentrated amphibious landing, potentially with armor, more than the scattered paratrooper landings, which he perhaps felt his infantry could contain, especially if they stayed hidden.
So he spread his limited forces.
He devoted significant strength to guarding the potential landing beaches along the coast, trying to cover that seaborne threat, which meant inevitably, he thinned out the defenses around the primary airborne targets, especially Maleme Airfield.
So, even knowing Maleme was the key target from the air, his fear of a sea landing led him to underdefend it.
It seems that way. Perfect knowledge of the enemy's airborne plan was undermined by his assessment of the seaborne threat and the critical lack of resources to cover both adequately, compounded by Cairo's refusal to let him neutralize the airfields, a fatal combination.
Okay, so the stage is set for disaster, despite Ultra. May 20th, 1941, 8 a.m.
The sky fills with German planes, hundreds of Ju-52s, gliders. The landings begin near Maleme and Chennai, but instead of surprised, unprepared defenders, they fly into carefully prepared positions.
The Allies were waiting for them.
Waiting and hidden. The moment the paratroopers started jumping, the Allied troops opened up with everything they had. Machine guns, rifles, those few Bofors guns. The dropping zones became killing fields.
The German losses must have been horrific from the outset.
Unbelievable. The Fallschirmjäger expected resistance, but not this level of coordinated, accurate fire. We have reports. One company of the 1st Assault Regiment near Maleme lost 112 men out of 126 killed within the first few hours.
Just decimated.
Virtually wiped out. Across the 3rd Battalion at Maleme, something like 400 out of 600 men were killed on that first day alone. It was a slaughter.
And a major reason for this vulnerability was that fundamental flaw in their airborne tactics at the time.
Yes, the weapons canisters, a critical error. To ensure accuracy, they jumped from very low altitude. But their rifles, machine guns, mortars, they were packed in separate heavy containers dropped alongside them.
Meaning when they landed.
When they landed, often tangled in olive trees or vineyards, they had only their pistols, maybe some grenades and knives. They had to get out of their harnesses, find the right canister, they were color-coded, open it, and get their weapons ready. All well under intense fire from concealed positions.
You were sitting duck.
For crucial minutes, yes. Allied soldiers described shooting them before they could even reach their rifles. Even their specialist kit, like the recoilless LG-40 gun, needed assembly time they just didn't have.
So the German plan for a quick surgical strike completely unraveled.
Immediately. Instead of seizing airfields in minutes, they were bogged down in desperate, close-quarters fights all over the western part of the island. Chaos reigned.
But the Germans weren't the only ones fighting. This is where the Cretan civilians come in, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is one of the defining features of the battle. It wasn't just Allied soldiers resisting. Greek troops, cadets, police, regular soldiers fought ferociously, and alongside them, ordinary Cretans.
With whatever they had.
Literally whatever they had. Old hunting rifles, shotguns, kitchen knives, axes, even clubs and farm tools. There are accounts of civilians attacking paratroopers still tangled in their chutes. Near Castelli, a combined force of Greek soldiers and armed civilians completely overwhelmed the German paratroopers dropped there.
And that story of the 8th Greek Regiment.
Incredible heroism. Near Elykianos, poorly armed, they held off repeated German attacks. When they finally ran out of ammunition, remember how little they had? They fixed bayonets and charged. They actually captured German weapons and kept fighting, holding their ground until May 27th.
This level of civilian resistance must have been a profound shock to the Germans.
A massive shock. It went against all their expectations and training. And as we'll see, it had deeply tragic consequences later in terms of reprisals.
But despite this incredible defense, the battle really turned on one specific point, didn't it? Maleme Airfield on the night of May 20th, 21st.
Yes, this is the absolute crux of the battle. The key terrain was Hill 107 overlooking Maleme Airfield. It was defended by the New Zealand 22nd Battalion.
Under Lieutenant Colonel Andrew.
That's right. During the fighting on the 20th, Andrew became isolated. Communications were cut. He started getting reports, possibly exaggerated in the confusion, that his forward companies were being overrun. He feared being cut off and destroyed in the morning.
So he asked for backup.
He requested reinforcement from his brigade commander, Brigadier Hargest. But Hargest, also under pressure in his sector and worried about committing his reserves too early, refused the request.
A critical denial.
A fateful one. Faced with this refusal, feeling exposed, Colonel Andrew made the decision to withdraw his battalion from Hill 107 during the night, under cover of darkness, to consolidate his position further east.
He pulled back from the key ground overlooking the airfield.
Exactly. Leaving Hill 107, and by extension the airfield below it, essentially undefended at a critical moment.
And the Germans realized this.
Instantly. General Student back in Athens was getting desperate reports of heavy losses everywhere except maybe Maleme. He sent up a reconnaissance flight at dawn. It flew over the airfield completely unopposed.
The signal he needed.
The green light. He immediately made the crucial command decision. Forget Rhythmno, forget Heraklion for now. Throw everything at Maleme. Every available Ju-52 transport plane, every mountain trooper ready to go was diverted to Maleme.
And they started landing.
They started landing reinforcements, troops from the 5th Mountain Division, right onto the airfield, largely unopposed. The Allies tried to shell the airfield, but it wasn't enough to stop the relentless flow of German soldiers' heavy weapons and supplies.
So that withdrawal from Hill 107, born of confusion and denied support, effectively handed the Germans the key to the island.
It really did. Once that air bridge into Maleme was established, the Germans could build up their strength continuously. The nature of the battle shifted irrevocably. It became a matter of time.
With the air bridge secure, the focus shifts dramatically to the sea, doesn't it? The Royal Navy's desperate attempt to stop reinforcements arriving by boat.
Yes, the Navy had effectively forced the Germans into the risky airborne plan in the first place because of their sea control. But now, with German air superiority established over Western Crete thanks to Maleme, the Navy had to operate under constant, brutal air attack.
A truly unenviable position.
And they paid a terrible price. The night of May 21st, 22nd, Force D intercepted that first German attempt at a sea convoy. Small boats, caiques, carrying German troops, escorted by just one Italian torpedo boat, the Lupo.
Sounds like an easy target for British cruisers and destroyers.
It should have been, but the night action was confused. There was some friendly fire, chaos. They did sink over half the small boats and force the convoy back, but the Italian commander, Mimbelli, showed incredible skill and bravery, managing to rescue about 2/3 of the German soldiers from the water.
So the first sea attempt was thwarted, but not decisively destroyed. What about the second attempt?
The following night, May 22nd, 23rd, Force C went after a second convoy, this one escorted by the Italian torpedo boat Sagittario. But by this time, the British ships had endured hours and hours of relentless dive-bombing attacks by German Stukas operating from Greek bases.
Their anti-aircraft ammunition must have been running low.
Critically low. The commander of Force C, Admiral King, faced a terrible choice. Press the attack on the convoy under ceaseless air assault with dwindling ammo, or withdraw to save his ships. He chose to withdraw. The convoy itself later turned back because of the naval threat, but the RN was now being systematically hammered from the air.
And May 22nd itself became a day of absolute disaster for the Royal Navy.
Arguably their single worst day of the war in terms of ship losses. The German air attacks were just relentless and unopposed. The destroyer HMS Greyhound was sunk early on.
Then the forces combined.
Yes, Force A1 and Force C met up, creating an even bigger target. The cruiser HMS Gloucester, already low on AA rounds, took multiple direct bomb hits. She had to be abandoned and sank. The loss of life was horrific, over 720 men.
Just devastating.
And it didn't stop. Soon after, the cruiser HMS Fiji was hit and sunk by a Ju-88 bomber. Even the battleships HMS Warspite, the flagship, and HMS Valiant were damaged and forced to pull back.
The cost is just staggering when you list it like that.
It truly is. For the entire Crete operation, The Royal Navy lost 1,828 sailors killed. They lost 12 warships sunk, plus 7 auxiliaries. It was, without doubt, the single costliest naval engagement of the entire war for the Royal Navy. It proved, brutally, the vulnerability of surface ships without adequate air cover.
A lesson learned in blood.
Absolutely. And with the sea now too dangerous for the RN to effectively intervene, and German reinforcements pouring into Maleme, the battle on land was essentially decided.
The order came to retreat.
Yes. Allied forces were ordered to conduct a fighting withdrawal south, across the White Mountains, towards the small fishing village of Sfakia on the south coast, where the Navy would attempt an evacuation.
Another dangerous operation for the Navy.
Extremely. And the rearguard actions during this retreat were incredibly fierce. The 5th Destroyer Flotilla under Lord Mountbatten paid a heavy price covering the withdrawal. HMS Kelly and Kashmir were both sunk by Stukas on May 23rd. That action actually inspired the famous film In Which We Serve.
And commandos were brought in.
Yes, Lay Force, a commando brigade, was landed briefly to help cover the retreat, fighting some sharp actions against the pursuing German mountain troops.
Including the Battle of 42nd Street.
A famous and brutal encounter on May 27th. New Zealand and Australian troops, running low on ammo but needing to hold the line to allow others to escape, launched a mass bayonet charge against the German 141st Mountain Regiment.
A bayonet charge in 1941.
Desperate measures. It was apparently incredibly fierce, close-quarters fighting, but it worked. They broke the German advance, cleared the road, and bought vital time for the evacuation effort at Sfakia.
Before we get to the end, what about the Italians? They were involved too, weren't they?
Yes, but very late in the day, and largely symbolically. On May 28th, when the battle was effectively over and the Allies were retreating, about 3,000 Italian troops landed unopposed at Sittia on the far eastern end of the island.
With some tanks.
A few L-335 light tanks, yes. They advanced westwards and eventually linked up with the Germans, but they played no real role in the main battle. Even the Germans struggled to get armor ashore. They managed to ferry just 2 pants of the 2nd light tanks across on a barge around the same time, mainly for the pursuit.
So the evacuation begins in earnest from Sfakia.
London officially ordered the evacuation on May 27th. The Royal Navy, despite the constant air threat and their previous losses, returned night after night to Sfakia and also managed 1 lift from Heraklion before it fell.
How many did they manage to get out?
It was remarkable under the circumstances. Between May 28th and June 1st, they evacuated around 18,600 British, Commonwealth, and some Greek troops, an incredible feat of seamanship and courage.
But that still left a lot of men behind.
It did. When the island formally surrendered on June 1st, about 12,000 Allied troops remained, along with thousands of Greek soldiers. They either became prisoners of war or melted away into the rugged mountains to form the nucleus of the Cretan resistance movement, which continued for years.
And this is where we return to the Cretan civilians and the dark legacy of the battle. That resistance had consequences.
Terrible consequences. The sheer scale and ferocity of the civilian resistance, ordinary people fighting back with improvised weapons, absolutely stunned the German command, particularly General Student.
They weren't prepared for partisans on this scale.
Not at all, and their reaction was immediate and brutal. Because these civilians weren't in uniform, the Germans felt justified in discarding the normal rules of war, the Hague Conventions. They viewed them as Franktireurs, irregular combatants deserving no quarter.
So reprisals started immediately.
Even before the battle was officially over, Student ordered swished, harsh retribution to make an example and crush the resistance. Mass executions began in villages near the landing zones, like Masseria.
And specific atrocities followed.
Yes, a pattern of terror unfolded. We know about the executions at Alkianos, where nearly 200 people were killed over several weeks. The village of Condamari saw its male inhabitants rounded up and shot an event infamously captured on film by a German war photographer.
And
Kondanos was completely destroyed, razed to the ground, about 180 inhabitants killed, and a chilling sign erected proclaiming it was punishment for murdering German soldiers. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a deliberate policy of terror that continued throughout the brutal 4-year occupation.
Including later massacres under Miller, the Butcher of Crete.
Exactly. Friedrich Wilhelm Müller oversaw horrific reprisals later in the war, like the Vianos massacres. He was eventually executed for war crimes after the war, but the scars on Crete remain deep.
If we look at the final Butcher's Bill, the casualty figures, it puts that German brutality into a certain grim context. They won, But the cost.
The cost for the Germans was absolutely shocking, especially for an operation they expected to be relatively swift. Official German military casualties were nearly 6,000 men killed, wounded, or missing.
Nearly 6,000 elite airborne and mountain troops.
Yes. And maybe even more critical strategically, they lost nearly 300 aircraft destroyed or badly damaged, mostly those vital Ju-52 transports needed for Barbarossa. It led General Student himself to famously declare that Crete was the death of the airborne force. He realized the cost was simply too high.
They achieved their objective, but shattered their spearhead doing it.
Precisely. Allied losses were also terrible, of course. Over 17,700 British and Commonwealth casualties, including more than 12,000 taken prisoner, and thousands of Greek soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. But the proportional loss to Germany's elite airborne arm was catastrophic and strategically decisive.
So a tactical victory for the Axis, but at a strategic price that reshaped German thinking.
Absolutely. That's the key takeaway. The most immediate impact was on Hitler himself. Seeing the casualty list for his elite Fallschirmjäger and the loss of surprise, he concluded that large-scale airborne assaults were just too costly, too risky. The element of surprise was gone.
He basically banned them.
He effectively did for major strategic operations. He ordered that the paratroopers, what was left of the 7th Flieger Division, should be used primarily as elite ground infantry on the Eastern Front. They were never reconstituted for the kind of large-scale strategic drops seen over Crete. Potential operations, like seizing Malta from the air, were shelved.
So Crete inadvertently saved Malta, perhaps.
It's certainly arguable. The loss of confidence in large-scale airborne ops was profound.
What about the connection to Barbarossa? Did Crete delay the invasion of the Soviet Union?
That's a long-running debate. The invasion date for Barbarossa was likely already pushed back due to the Balkan campaign in general. Crete itself probably didn't cause the main delay. However,
It's the aircraft losses.
the loss of nearly 300 aircraft, especially those Ju-52 transports, right before Barbarossa kicked off, definitely hurt the Luftwaffe's transport and logistical capacity in the crucial opening weeks of the invasion of Russia. They simply couldn't replace those planes and crews quickly enough. It hampered their ability to support the fast-moving ground troops.
Interesting. And on the Allied side, what lessons were learned from this defeat?
Painful lessons, but important ones. London was absolutely shocked by the failure at the airfields. The fact that they knew the plan via Ultra and still failed to secure the most critical points, it led directly to a major reorganization.
Which was?
The formation of the RAF Regiment in February 1942. For the first time, the Royal Air Force had its own dedicated ground troops whose specific job was airfield defense, precisely to prevent another Maleme.
So a direct institutional response.
Yes. And ironically, while Hitler turned his back on large-scale airborne operations,
The Allies were impressed.
they were deeply impressed by the potential shown. Despite the horrific German losses, the ability of airborne forces to seize a key objective like Maleme, establish an airhead, and allow reinforcements to pour in that demonstrated the power of the concept.
So Crete actually spurred Allied airborne development.
It significantly accelerated it. The British, and especially the Americans, looked at Crete and said, okay, the Germans paid too high a price, but the idea works. They started pouring resources into creating their own large airborne divisions, the formations that would later drop into Sicily, Normandy, Arnhem. Crete was a bloody blueprint.
So wrapping this up, Crete stands as this incredibly stark, almost paradoxical battle. A German airborne victory bought at such a cost it ended their strategic use of paratroopers.
Set against a catastrophic defeat for the Royal Navy, their costliest single action of the war. It was the first major airborne invasion, the first time German forces faced mass civilian resistance on this scale, and it forced fundamental shifts in strategy on both sides.
Hitler abandoned the weapon, the Allies picked it up.
In essence, yes, it was a tactical Axis win that came at a strategic price. Hitler wasn't willing to pay again. It reshaped campaigns to come.
Which brings us back to that core tension you mentioned earlier, the gap between knowing and doing.
Exactly. And that leaves us with a final thought for you listening to chew on. The Allies had Ultra. They had arguably near-perfect intelligence about the German plan, where, when, how, yet they lost.
Because of resource shortages, the command decision about the airfields, Freiburg's deployment.
All those factors played a role. But consider this. Once the Germans secured Maleme Airfield, they could fly in troops and heavy equipment almost at will, creating overwhelming logistical superiority locally. So was the battle truly lost because of tactical errors and lack of equipment on the ground during those first chaotic hours? Or was Crete's fate sealed the moment Middle East Command ordered Freiburg to leave those airfields usable, prioritizing future plans over immediate defensive necessity? In the end, what weighs more heavily in the balance of war, having perfect intelligence or having overwhelming logistics?